Welcome to the Curious Machine. Have you ever been, in the middle of something, maybe just talking to someone or walking somewhere familiar, and boom, you get this really strong, almost weird feeling that you've done this exact same thing before? That uncanny sense of familiarity, like you're reliving a moment. That's deja vu. And it's actually super common. Something like, what, 2 out of 3 people experience it at some point? People have noticed it for ages, too. Even St. Augustine back in the 5th century talked about faulty memories. Uh, so today we're going to dive deep. We want to move past the usual fictional ideas and really dig into what science tells us about this pretty mysterious brain thing.
Okay, so we've all felt it, right? And I think for a lot of us, deja vu instantly brings up, well, that sci-fi movie. Let's just get it out there. Is deja vu really a glitch in the Matrix? Like, is the universe rebooting or something?
Yeah, it's a really sticky idea, isn't it? Very imaginative, and you can see why it caught on. But, well, scientifically speaking, the evidence really points towards deja vu being this fascinating neurological thing happening, inside our own heads. It's about our brain's own processing. And that actually brings up another common mix-up, the idea that deja vu lets you predict the future. People experiencing it often really feel like they know what's about to happen next. It's a strong conviction. But studies, even ones using things like navigation simulations where you have to guess turns, show pretty consistently that there's no real boost in prediction accuracy. You feel like, absolutely. But your actual chances of guessing right, they don't improve. It creates this powerful but ultimately false sense of precognition, which is interesting in itself, right?
Okay, so no matrix glitch, no crystal ball. That definitely shifts things. So if it's all internal happening in the brain, what are the main scientific ideas trying to explain it? How does this feeling actually happen? Is it just one thing or?
That's really the key question. And probably the biggest group of explanations falls under memory. The basic idea is that deja vu is fundamentally a kind of memory trick. Imagine your brain recognizes something as familiar, but it can't quite access the tag telling it when or where it saw it before. So you get the familiarity signal, but without the context. And that mismatch feels strange, maybe even unsettling. Researchers have actually tested this in some clever ways. There was one study where people learned some stuff and they used hypnosis to make them forget they'd learned it. When they showed them the material again, a lot of participants were like, yeah, I've seen this, but I have no idea where or when. That feeling is really close to deja vu. There was another one using puzzle games. I think it's called Railroad Rush Hour. Participants were given a suggestion, post-hypnotically, that the setup would feel familiar. And they reported really strong deja vu feelings, saying things like, oh, I think I did this years ago, even though they hadn't. It shows that feeling of familiarity can be triggered separately from an actual specific memory. And related to that, this idea of memory tricks, there's something called cryptomnesia. Think of it like a corrupted file in your memory. You learn something, maybe passively, stored it away, but you forgot the act of learning it. The source is gone. Then later, something similar pops up, and that incomplete memory gets triggered. Bam, strong feeling of familiarity, but no idea why. Deja vu. It really highlights how our brains can sometimes, separate the what from the when and where of a memory. And this links pretty neatly to dreams as well. There's a surprisingly strong link people report between deja vu and things they've dreamed about. Studies suggest a fair chunk of deja vu experiences might trace back to elements from dreams. Our brains process and store dream memories differently, right? They can feel vivid, but they aren't tied to waking reality in the same way. So if a real event happens to echo a dream fragment, even vaguely, it could trigger that I've been here before feeling. But it's not just memory. There's another really interesting angle: split perception, sometimes called dual neurological processing. This idea goes back to the 60s to a researcher named Robert Efron. His theory was basically that our brain gets sensory input twice, technically, once from each hemisphere, maybe, but with a minuscule delay between them, like microseconds. Normally, the brain is amazing at syncing these up perfectly, so we just perceive one smooth, continuous experience. The analogy might be like watching a movie where the audio and video are just slightly out of sync, almost imperceptibly. So Efron suggested that if that synchronization mechanism hiccups, just for a moment, the brain processes those two near-identical signals as two separate events. The second signal feels like a repeat of the first one, which just happened milliseconds ago, and that gives you the deja vu sensation. And more recently, fMRI studies, where they can actually watch brain activity, have found that when deja vu is triggered experimentally, there's activity in areas linked to what they call mnemonic conflict.
Mnemonic conflict, like the memory part of the brain is getting mixed signals.
Exactly. It's basically the brain regions involved in memory signaling that something's off, that there's a conflict between feeling familiar and knowing it's new, which kind of supports this idea of a processing glitch or anomaly.
Okay, that's a lot to think about. So the brain might be tricking itself, either because a faint memory got triggered without context, or maybe because of this tiny processing delay. But with that split perception idea, if the delay is so small, why doesn't the brain just smooth it over usually? Why does it sometimes register as two things? And does that theory help explain why some people seem to get deja vu way more often than others?
Those are really good questions. The why it fails sometimes, well, that's still being figured out. It probably points to the fact that our brain's synchronization, while amazing, isn't absolutely perfect 100% of the time. Like any complex biological system, there can be tiny momentary fluctuations. As for why it happens more to some people, yeah, that could definitely be linked. Differences in how efficiently our neural pathways communicate, maybe slight variations in brain structure related to temporal lobe processing. These individual differences could make someone more prone to that micro delay, actually resulting in the feeling of deja vu.
It really is amazing how common it is, like you said at the start. But it makes me wonder, does this usually brief, maybe slightly weird feeling ever cross a line? Does it ever become something more serious or maybe a sign of something else going on?
Yes, absolutely. While the typical deja vu is usually just fleeting and, frankly, harmless for most people, there is a more intense version called deja vu.
Deja vu. Already lived.
Exactly. And unlike the usual feeling, deja vu is described as much stronger, more persistent. So much so that people might actually change their behavior based on it, or even develop sort of delusional ideas because they're so convinced they've lived through this exact sequence of events before. It can be quite disruptive. And deja vu itself, even the more common type, can be a symptom in certain medical situations. It's known to be quite common, for example, in temporal lobe epilepsy. That's a specific type of epilepsy where seizures start in the temporal lobes, areas heavily involved in memory and emotion. Those electrical disturbances can directly trigger these strong sensations. Researchers are even looking into specific genes, like one called LGI1, that might be linked to this type of epilepsy, which could indirectly suggest a potential genetic component for some forms of deja vu too. It's also been reported sometimes with migraines, particularly those that come with an aura. But, and this is important to stress, despite what some people might assume, lots of research has looked into links with general mental health conditions. And generally, they haven't found a strong connection between typical deja vu and things like anxiety disorders or dissociative disorders or schizophrenia. So for the average person having that fleeting feeling, it's usually not a sign of a major underlying mental illness. Oh, and one other interesting link is pharmacology.
Like medications?
Yeah, certain combinations of drugs have occasionally reported anecdotally to trigger deja vu. For example, a mix of amantadine and phenylpropanolamine, which we use together sometimes, or another combo involving 5-HTP and carbidopa. It suggests that messing with certain neurotransmitter systems, maybe dopamine or serotonin pathways, can potentially induce this kind of experience too. So brain chemistry is definitely part of the picture.
Wow. Okay. So there's the common fleeting kind, and then this more intense deja vu, plus links to epilepsy and maybe even meds. It really makes you think about that line between a normal brain quirk and something else, which leads to another question. Are there other weird little perception or memory glitches like this? Is deja vu part of a bigger family?
Oh, definitely. There's a whole set of related experiences, sometimes called the deja family, or sometimes seen as opposites or cousins. One you might have heard of is Jamais Vu.
Never seen. So the opposite.
Pretty much, yeah. It's that really strange feeling when you encounter something you know is familiar, like a common word, or maybe a person you see every day, or a place you know, but it suddenly feels completely new, foreign, unfamiliar. You know, rationally it's familiar, but the feeling of familiarity is just gone.
There was a funny study, actually. They had people just repeat a common word, like door, over and over again for like a minute.
Oh, yeah, I think I've done that. It starts to sound really weird.
Exactly. And in that study, something like 68% of the participants reported symptoms similar to Jamais Vu. The word lost its meaning, felt alien. Some even started doubting if door was a real word. It shows how easily that sense of familiarity can break down.
That's fascinating. Okay, what else is in the family?
Well, there's Presque Vu, almost seen.
Almost seen. It's like
Right.
on the tip of your tongue. Very much like the tip of the tongue feeling, yeah. But maybe more profound. It's that frustrating sense that you're right on the verge of grasping some important idea, some insight or revelation. You can feel it hovering just out of reach, but you can't quite bring it into focus. It's that feeling of almost knowing, but not quite getting there.
Hmm.
Really tantalizing, sometimes annoying.
You know, that tip of the tongue thing for a big idea, Presque Vu, I swear I had that yesterday trying to remember some concept. It is really frustrating. Has it happened to you a lot, dealing with complex info all the time?
Oh, absolutely. It happens to everyone, I think, regardless of expertise. It seems to be a universal brain quirk, that feeling of reaching for something that's just obscured. Then you also have déjà vu,
Already dreamed.
right? That specific feeling that what you're experiencing right now is something you've definitely encountered before in a dream. And finally, maybe déjà entendu, already heard.
Like hearing a song for the first time but swearing you've heard it.
Exactly like that. Or hearing a piece of information and feeling certain you've heard it before, even if you can't place where or when, and maybe you actually haven't. That vague auditory familiarity.
Okay, so deja vu isn't alone. It's part of this whole spectrum of weird ways our perception and memory can, like, hiccup, I guess. So, wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway here? We went from, matrix glitches to some pretty complex neuroscience. It sounds like deja vu isn't about seeing the future or parallel universes. It's more like a really interesting peek under the hood at how our brains build our sense of reality and familiarity, right? And sometimes the wiring gets crossed just a little bit.
That's a perfect way to put it. Yeah, it's not psychic, it's not sci-fi, it's biology. It's a window into the incredible complexity and also the occasional imperfections of memory formation and conscious perception. Understanding these seemingly minor glitches, these little moments where things feel off, is actually really important for understanding the bigger picture of how our minds work. Our brains aren't these perfect, infallible computers. They're evolved organs full of quirks and shortcuts and redundancies that mostly work amazingly well, but sometimes produce these fascinating side effects.
So if you're listening and maybe you thought, that science has all the big stuff figured out, or that the remaining mysteries are too huge and abstract to relate to, just think about this. Think about deja vu. This incredibly common feeling, something most of us experience, is still teaching us so much about the fundamental workings of our own minds. It shows that deep scientific mysteries can be hiding in plain sight right there in our everyday experience. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other aspects of your own daily thoughts or feelings might be a doorway to understanding something profound about how we work?
Thank you very much for sharing this enjoyable conversation with us. Until we meet again tomorrow with a brand new topic, take very good care of yourselves. Goodbye.